The future, the grand nexus of humanity's achievements, the beauty of society will be unmatched. There'll be flying cars and robots and teleportation and happiness abound. We are excited to build this future for you, and as long as you work for it, you'll get it.
Vladimir Putin's war in Ukraine keeps spilling over into Russian territory.
Researchers have confirmed, as if we didn't know, 2023 was the hottest year on record.
COVID-19, the disease that defined our lives in 2020.
In the early 2000s, a liminal aesthetic was born. After the wake of Y2K and the turn of the century, the idea of what the future would look like was clouding everybody's mind. The internet was growing in popularity, and the internet culture itself was everywhere. Computers and smartphones were beginning to take commonplace, and pretty much everybody had access to either a gaming console, a PC, a phone, or anything that has a screen. And at that time, little did we know that an aesthetic was being born before our very eyes. The aesthetic is now known as Frutiger Aero. And in this video, I'm going to be explaining the entire aesthetic, everything from the start to the finish, the entire timeline of it. And I want to be taking you back through memory lane. And I believe you all will get some big nostalgia points from this video. I know I did, scripting it and recording it. So without further ado, let's get into the aesthetic that raised an entire generation. Quickly, I want to shout out Kylie Somber Tabogli and Shy Valley for inspiration on this video, and a lot of my videos actually. Those are two great YouTubers. Go check them both out. I actually collabed with Kylie, so check that out if you want to. I'll link it below. So what is Frutiger Aero? Frutiger Aero, or as it's also known as the Web Gloss 2.0, or something along those lines, was an internet aesthetic and technology aesthetic that took place from the year 2003-ish to late 2013. Also known as the best years of existence. Now, as you can tell, this aesthetic is a very early on in the internet age, and it pretty much was the first online aesthetic that is to be talked about. And that's why it holds a special place in all of our hearts. Images and videos displaying this style were extremely popular in advertising, in pop culture, in stock images and computer screens and UIs across the board. The entire aura and energy surrounding these images is fueled by several real-life things as well, like Y2K, the end of the .com era, old web, and also the new vibe of the turn of the century. 2000 just happened, and the internet was taking off like a rocket. So what makes something a part of this aesthetic? What makes something Frutiger Aero? Let's examine. Things like glossy textures, fish, water, bubbles, glass buildings, puffy clouds, birds and reflections, and vibrant greens and blues, and the use of skeuomorphism, which again is another big word, but it pretty much is just the design concept of making a technological thing look like a real thing. So think of the old iPhone wallpapers, how the apps kind of look like real things, but they were obviously fake. Another example would be the YouTube app, how it used to look like a TV, but it was, a flat 2D thing, even though it was made to look real. That's what skeuomorphism is. Other key elements of this niche include glossy search bars, as well as linear and colorful gradients. These very glossy and shiny scenes of nature, as well as using Frutiger fonts, and environments that involve water and bubbles and the sky. In some cases, glowy and shiny effects also were added to images. Some people mistake this aesthetic for just being a part of the Y2K internet craze and the old web thing, but no, in reality, it's its own aesthetic, and it really pioneered and trailblazed all of technology's interfaces and user interfaces. And you can pretty much tell the difference between the Y2K aesthetic to this one, because this is way more vibrant and colorful and glossy, whereas the old web and Y2K technology was ugly. To be honest with you, it was kind of disgusting. Frutiger Aero is commonly known as almost the gateway, or the in-between from the old tech to the new tech. And that's pretty much what we are as a generation as well. Late Gen Z, and we are a generation between the old and the new. So I think it's very fitting that we grew up with an aesthetic on the technology that was also between the old and the new. Anyways, I want to jump into the timeline of this aesthetic, and I want to jump into all of the beginning things, and the middle, and the rise, and the fall, and everything there is to know about it online and in our lives. And without further talking, I'm just going to get into it. Frutiger Aero's humble beginnings date back to 2001, when Windows Vista and Mac OS X were becoming more and more popular across the private world and the business world. The home screen designs of these computers had a very glossy, embossed vibe and a very vibrant, skeuomorphic design, like I mentioned earlier. I'm sure all of you watching this remember the old wallpapers from Windows with the green fields and the weird planets and stuff. That's what this aesthetic is. And before 2001, technology had a much less vibrant and colorful and whimsical vibe to them. But once Y2K happened, the dot-com bubble burst, and other world events like 9/11 happened, these shiny new designs and these other slates appeared on all technology, and it was almost as if it was shifting towards a more happy and jovial existence. Mainstream popularity, 2004 to 2007. The rise in popularity of this aesthetic really began to take off in late 2004, when several new designs on different technologies were released to the public. Windows Media Player 10, PSPs, the PSX, or the early Apple iPod, and other things along those lines were all being released pretty much at the same time. Then the next year, in 2005, and then later in 2006, Windows XP was released to the public. And this was the exact most important moment in the niche's history, mainly because the entire interface of Windows XP was the Aero aesthetic. If you went to school from like 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, and even 8, like elementary school, I'm almost positive that you'll remember the computer labs. They all had the Windows XP on them, and I'm sure you remember that glossy, bright, colorful background every time you turn the computer on, as well as the shiny borders, the big texts, the bright colors, and all of the almost youthful ignorance of that simple early on technology. And to this day, those memories are still very nostalgic for me, and I'm sure they are for you as well. Later on in 2006, the famous Xbox 360 was released to the market, and of course, its entire UI was this bubbly, bright aesthetic. Other consoles like the DS Lite, the PS3, and the Wii, just to name a few, were also released at that exact same time, and again, all of which had that bubbly, bright, popping in your face energy to them. As if the aesthetic needed even more solidifying, later the next year, in 2007, the first iPhone was released to the public, and I'm sure you all remember it. The bright wallpapers, the weird bubbles and icebergs and fields and stars, and it just seemed strange at the time, but I don't think that we really realized how important it was, especially now with the corporate slop that we have on our technology these days. And I'm sure, like many of you, I didn't know this aesthetic, this color palette really had a name to it. I mean, like I said, I grew up with it. I didn't really know it had a name to it until recently. Looking back, taking a deep dive through the rabbit hole, I'm really glad I can put a name to it. I myself remember coming home from school, getting on my Wii and PlayStation, and just seeing these very glossy, bold textures and these Northern Lights backgrounds and these weird shiny vibrations on everything. I'm sure you all remember that as well. I think everyone knows how nostalgic it is. It's just that no one knew what to call it. And now that the name Frutiger Aero is gaining more and more mainstream popularity, more people are figuring out about it. The prime years, 2007 to 2013. So during these years, Frutiger just grew in popularity. As I mentioned, those several technologies that came out in sequential order just bolstered it up to the mainstream media. It was all used in advertising, it was used in tech, it was used in commercials, it was used in the corporate hemisphere and the private hemisphere. Everybody was using Frutiger Aero. Millions of people had computer screens with it, and millions of kids playing gaming consoles had the designs on it. The vibrant, the 3D realistic, bubbly, glossy imagery was everywhere. It was in our minds. It almost had a childlike whimsy that we ourselves as children had at the same time it did. During these same years, 2007 and 2013, even more subgenres popped up, with things like Electropop 08, McBling, and Surf Crush, and even more things that extended the Frutiger niche even further. The decline, 2013 to 2021. On a fateful day in 2012, the skeuomorphic look that all the tech had used for the past few years began to fade out. Instead, companies opted for a sleek, flat design, and it was becoming more mainstream. Pretty much minimalism was starting to take a hold, and that glossy, 3D vibrancy of the earlier 2000s was dying. I hate the new flat designs, by the way. There's like no life to it. It's disgusting. Please bring me back to the old design. But I digress. The very last mainstream console or piece of tech to really have the Frutiger design was the Wii U, which released in 2012. The only problem is the Wii U commercially flopped. Like horribly so. It only sold like 13.5 million units. And this just caused even more for the aesthetic to die. It didn't help it at all. After 2012 and 2013, new phones and tablets and PCs all began to adopt that flat design. And the colorful whimsy glossiness of the Frutiger Aero aesthetic, as we all know and loved, would die. From 2013 to 2017, almost nothing regarding the aesthetic was even talked about. It kind of just faded further into obscurity. Really, the only place you might have seen Frutiger Aero from 2013 to 2017 was in school textbooks, because it was lightly used in their design. But besides that, it was gone. The revival of the aesthetic, 2017 to now. The actual term Frutiger Aero didn't get named on the aesthetic until recently, in 2017 specifically, when someone named Sophie Lee coined the term. Now, Sophie Lee works for something called the Consumer Aesthetic Research Institute, which I don't think that exists. That's gotta be fake, but whatever. But what happens to a concept when you give it a name? It can go viral on TikTok, of course, and that's exactly what it did in mid to late 2022. Videos of the aesthetic went viral and were shown to millions of people. The videos were typically about the nostalgic aspect of the aesthetic and our childhoods and how we grew up with it. Pretty much everything that I mentioned in this video. And in fact, hashtag Frutiger Aero got used over 30 million times in 2022, which is about 2 times the amount of people that bought the Wii U in 2012. So you can kind of see how much recognition this thing was getting. Anyways, TikTok seemed to bring back the interest in the nostalgia regarding Frutiger Aero. And the next year in August, the official Windows TikTok account, I'm talking about the official TikTok account that was owned by Windows, posted a video specifically about Frutiger Aero, acknowledging it, almost legitimizing it in a way. Furthermore, the official Windows Wikipedia page developed official sections talking about the Aero design. The bevels, the bright rounded colors, the fish, the water, every single thing was being revived. Pictures and images that display the Frutiger Aero theme oftentimes are very telling of what we thought the future might look like. In the early 2000s, the future was something that was more of a novelty than a reality, and it was almost as if we were using this technology and this interface to mimic what we thought the future would be. Bright, vibrant, colorful, like I said, full of whimsy. I know I've used these words a lot, but that's just how I describe them. These images are proverbially the future from the past, what every single person thought it would look like. The entire Y2K area from the early 2000s is shrouded in these images. The happiness of the turn of the century, the openness to move forward, the childlike wonder at the world. Everything was so perfect, it literally bled into the technology we were using. And in a way, our technology even reflects how society's doing. I would venture to say that the boring, flat design of modern day society is very indicative of how boring and flat we feel. But the vibrant, embossed, glowy aesthetic was how we felt back then. The subgenres of the niche. So the nostalgia factor of Y2K is in sort of a renaissance right now, and it's been that way for a couple years. It seems to follow the typical pattern of something called the 20-year nostalgia cycle, which is like exactly how it sounds. Every 20 years, something becomes nostalgic that happened 20 years ago. That's precisely what's happening. So you just heard the timeline of the aesthetic, and you heard the rise and the fall and the beginning of the rise again. But just like everything else in life, there's been subgenres that have popped up underneath the Frutiger Aero niche, and I'm about to get into all those right now. Frutiger Aero is pretty much a sub-aesthetic that shows nature and it focuses on it. Imagery that involves living in harmony with this beast of a nature that we have in the world. There's often themes of futurism and new houses and technology implanted in bright, vibrant, grassy plains and wilderness, almost to show that we can live in harmony with nature if we try. You can definitely see the bright, glossy colors from the original aesthetic, but you can also see the focus on the future and technology. Pretty much is all about coexisting. It symbolizes the environment that we live in alongside our technology, all living harmonious beside each other. Frutiger Aero. So this sub-niche is very similar to the main one, except it involves imagery relating to the ocean and the sea, as well as beaches. These images are very vibrant with their blues and their oranges and their colors of the ocean, and they almost always have fish or bubbles or seabirds or waves in some regard. Alongside that, of course, they have the glossy finish that the rest of them do. You can kind of see the futurism from the early 2000s in these Aqua Aero images. These personally remind me of the old like Windows XP, Windows Vista wallpapers and the old iPhone wallpapers with the random fish and bubbles and stuff. This specific sub-niche, the Aqua Aero, is actually known to be the final stop or the halfway point between the Y2K tech look and the actual main Frutiger Aero. So it's kind of the in-between, the gradient of change, you could say. Dark Aero. Dark Aero is a really weird, strange sub-niche, and it's pretty much where everything is dark but glossy. And instead of the vibrant colors being used, a more subdued color palette is being used. This genre is more how technology is now, but it still uses the exact same glossy embossed Frutiger Aero design. Technozen is an aesthetic that was from the mid to late 2000s in the Japanese culture, specifically in Japanese technology, like the Wii. This one is very cozy and friendly, and it's pretty much the exact equivalent in Japanese culture to our Frutiger Aero, but it kind of falls under the same umbrella. So Funky Seasons is an interesting one. This was a very popular color scheme that was used in the aesthetic in the early 2000s, and it was mainly used for advertising and commercials, specifically like Just Dance games for the Wii and other video games too. The aesthetic mainly includes 4 colors, those being electric lime, sky blue, hot pink, and neon orange. And I don't know about you, but these send me directly back to the nostalgia of the early 2000s. All these colors used to be popping up on the screen when I was watching TV and cartoons, advertising games, and I think there was a few McDonald's commercials and stuff with these same colors. Very nostalgic. If you ever used the application PowerPoint in the mid-2000s as well, all of the templates for presentations had the Frutiger Aero design. The random northern lights, the random colors and waves and glows and random strings of energy. Y'all know what I'm talking about. And finally is one of my favorite sub-niches, which is called Cyber Glacier. Now these are usually very bright, colorful images with a watery, glossy vibe. The textures are shiny and vibrant, and it really just looks like early 2000s CGI, but all of them of course have icebergs in them or some kind of frozen water. All of these subgenres and niches that I just talked about stem and come from one single liminal niche spawned all of these other ones, and I'm sure you know or I've seen some of them. That's just crazy to me. Other uses of the niche. The influence didn't just stop at technology or the interface designs though. No, this aesthetic actually made it into countless games and movies as well. Not so much as the Y2K design did, but there was still some overlap. Shows like Teletubbies and Phineas and Ferb and WALL-E and Despicable Me and the Bee Movie and Meet the Robinson, bright and vibrant colors and the melancholy of childhood. The aesthetic, of course, made its way into video games too, and not just in the user interfaces, but in the actual games, like Mario and Sonic and Kingdom Hearts and The Sims and Spore and Wii Sports. You all remember how glossy and 3D and vibrant these things were. Every person watching this video at some point in their childhood saw something with this aesthetic. You might not have just known how widespread it was. Seeing this aesthetic is really just a moniker of the early to mid 2000s nostalgia, before everything got corporate and flat. Everything felt real back in the day, even on our technology. It was almost as if we weren't using technology to escape the real world or something. The fun and whimsy of childhood was on our screens for display then, but it's no longer there. The bubbliness and the colorfulness and the embossed look was just more lighthearted and fun, but just like society seems, there's way less happiness now. There's no more fun. The aesthetic even managed to make its way into toys and even architecture. malls and shopping centers and even robotic dinosaurs in their advertisements used this future design. We had no idea what the future would look like. We just hoped it looked like this. The aesthetic was an idealized version of how life was in this time. I would venture to say that most of you watching this are like 14 to 25. So you all grew up during the time period when this aesthetic was big. We all thought the world was bright and bubbly and glossy. That's how we saw it. It had a youthful naiveness that you just can't mistake. We weren't at that time aware of the awful, disgusting things that happen in the world or how bad it was going to get in just a few short years. It was almost as if we were growing up right alongside technology, us and tech growing up together. And just like we as kids were bright and smiley and bubbly, technology was bright and vibrant and colorful and bubbly. I truly believe that that's the reason most people look back at this aesthetic and the time it took place with a smile. It reminds us all of how we used to be. Just like our generation grew up in a liminal time, a time after the old, but a time before the new, this aesthetic marks a liminal barrier of old technology and new technology. And that right there is why we can relate to it so much. That's why we look back and are happy when we see it. No, I'm not looking too deep into it, and no, I'm not crazy. That's just the truth, I think. If you didn't grow up in the early 2000s, you can't really understand how it was to be there, but I know those of you watching understand, and you look back at this aesthetic and how our lives were and how nostalgic it is, and you really just, you almost get emotional looking at it, because it was so wrong. We were wrong about the future. We were completely wrong about it. But it was very wholesome. But it was so wholesome that we put our ideas of what the future would be into Frutiger Aero and showed these beautiful, amazing scenes. Even though it turned out to be wrong, I still think that youthful optimism is very much needed. We were so hopeful for an amazing, bright, and vibrant future, and we never got it. So it's up to us at this point in time right now, reel everything back in and try to make it bright and vibrant once more. Okay, that's it for the video. Hopefully you all watched to the end and enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like and share with a friend. This is the first style of video I'm making this way. If you do enjoy it, just make sure you tell me. That way the algorithm knows that the channel's not dead in the ground or something like that. But I really enjoyed making it, really enjoyed researching it, and I hope you all are excited for the rest of the liminal niches I'm going to go over. I'm very excited to look into, trauma core, weird core, dream core, all the cores, every core, and how they all relate to each other on this Venn diagram. I hope I did this aesthetic justice. I know I used a lot of the same words, but those are just the ones that came to mind. And I'm sorry if you didn't like it. I did. Sorry. I don't know what to tell you. Let me know if I missed one, or if you wanted to see me go over a specific aesthetic or anything like that. Just let me know your feelings about this in the comments. I'm interested to see what you have to say. I love and appreciate you all. And remember, just because things change, like this aesthetic change to a more flat design, doesn't mean everything has to get worse and darker like the aesthetic did. It's up to us and our generation to bring back the colors and the bubbles and the life. Love you all. Have a great day.